Welcome back to City Education, your home for knowledge in all forms, shapes, and sizes. Now today, we're going deeper into the world of environmental law. This time, we'll be looking at the international law perspective of environmental law, as well as climate change and how it's viewed in a South African context. Now, climate change is no longer a distant threat. It is happening here and now. Human activity is changing the Earth's climate system at an unprecedented rate, affecting ecosystems, communities, and economies around the world. At the heart of the response to this crisis is the principle of sustainable development, the idea that we must meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, sustainable development requires more than just conserving nature. It demands a careful balance between economic growth, social equity, and environmental protection. Every decision we make today, from the energy we use to the way we manage our forests and cities, affects our planet's future. Now let's look into deep ecology. Deep ecology teaches us a fundamental truth, which is that humans are part of nature, not separate from it. Nature is a complex, self-regulating system designed to maintain balance and sustain life. However, human interference has become excessive. Activities like industrial pollution, deforestation,
and fossil
fuel consumption are pushing ecosystems beyond their capacity to recover. This overreach not only harms wildlife and natural habitats, but also threatens human societies that rely on these ecosystems for food, water, and air. Sustainable development, therefore, is not just about using resources responsibly. It is about recognizing our role within natural systems, respecting their limits, and minimizing our impact. By aligning human activity with the natural balance, we can protect ecosystems and ensure that future generations inherit a healthy, functioning planet. In response to the growing concerns about human-induced climate change, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, was adopted in 1992. The convention recognizes that human activity, especially the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, significantly increasing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. These increases amplify the natural greenhouse effect, leading to global warming and severe impacts on ecosystems, societies, and economies worldwide. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change sets out key principles to guide global action. Principle 2 of the Convention, which deals with environmental justice, outlines that nations must share the burdens and benefits of climate action fairly. Developed countries, which historically contributed most to greenhouse gas emissions, bear greater responsibility for reducing emissions and supporting developing nations. Principle 3, which deals with precautionary measures, outlines that even where scientific certainty is incomplete, countries must take proactive steps to prevent harm. This includes adopting low-carbon technologies, protecting forests, and advancing sustainable social-economic development. Ultimately, the UNFCCC aims to balance human development needs with the imperative to reduce the global carbon footprint using a sustainable future for all. In 1986, the United Nations adopted the Declaration on the Right to Development, affirming that all people have the right to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political development. The declaration further states that development must improve human well-being while respecting human dignity. The following year, the World Commission on Environment and Development, WCED, released the Brundtland Report 1987, which popularized the concept of sustainable development. It defines sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The report emphasized that environmental protection and socio-economic development are interconnected, not opposing goals. Now, In 1992, the global community came together at the United Nations Conference on Environmental and Development, UNCED, in Rio de Janeiro. Here, the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development was birthed. The declaration laid down 27 principles, including the precautionary principle, the intergenerational equity principle, the common but differentiated responsibility principle. Together, these international instruments created a framework for balancing human development with environmental protection, guiding both global and national policies on climate change and sustainable development. Now we can get into climate change. Now in South Africa, the right to a healthy environment is enshrined in Section 24 of the Constitution. It entails that every person has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being, and the state must protect the environment for present and future generations. The National Environmental Management Act, NEMA, further operationalizes this right. Section 240, subsection 1 of the NEMA, requires that when the minister, basically the minister responsible for mineral resources, or an MEC, considers an application for environmental authorization, they must firstly take into account all relevant factors, including likely pollution, environmental impacts, and environmental degradation. Secondly, they must consider measures to protect the environment from harm and to prevent, control, or mitigate pollution and environmental damage. This framework ensures that development and environmental protection are considered together. Economic growth, energy production, and infrastructure development cannot proceed without a careful assessment of their environmental impact. In effect, NEMA embeds the precautionary and preventative principles in governance. Basically, if there's uncertainty about potential harm, decision makers must be on the side of caution to protect the environment. Now, in order to strengthen South Africa's commitment to sustainable development and climate change, the Climate Change Act of 2024 was enacted. This act builds on principles of Section 24 and NEMA, providing a legal framework for the country's transition to a low-carbon economy. The act focuses on three key strategies. Firstly, the transition to a low-carbon economy, basically reducing reliance on coal and other emission-intensive fuels, while promoting clean energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable technologies. The second strategy is the protection of natural carbon sinks, basically safeguarding forests, wetlands, and other ecosystems that absorb carbon dioxide and help regulate the climate. The third strategy was the implementation of sustainable practices across sectors. This, in essence, promotes the integrating of climate-conscious approaches in industries like agriculture, transportation, and urban planning. This framework ensures that economic growth does not come at the expense of the environment. In other words, by aligning development with climate mitigation and adaptation, South Africa demonstrates its commitment to intergenerational justice, precaution, and sustainable development. The Climate Change Act of 2024 is a practical step to reducing the nation's carbon footprint, protecting ecosystems, and ensuring that development is balanced with environmental protection. The landmark case of Earthlife Africa, the Minister of Environmental Affairs, marked South Africa's first major climate change court battle. At the center of this dispute was a proposed 1,200 megawatt coal-fired power station near Lephalale in Limpopo. Despite South Africa being a significant greenhouse gas emitter, the environmental authorization was granted without a separate, professionally researched climate change impact assessment. Earthlife Africa, a non-profit organization advocating for environmental protection, challenged this decision. The court ruled in favor of Earthlife Africa on almost all substantive legal points, emphasizing several key principles. Firstly, the principle emphasizing that climate change poses a substantial risk on substantial development in South Africa. Basically, development cannot proceed without evaluating these risks. The second principle was intergenerational justice, which requires that climate impacts be considered to protect future generations. Thirdly, climate change must be assessed before granting environmental authorization. This cannot be deferred or ignored. No, for the principle outlining that professional climate change impact reports are essential to examine both mitigation and adaptation of measures effectively. Now, another principle that was emphasized was the precautionary and preventative principle, which requires a careful, risk-averse approach, especially when information is incomplete and uncertain. The court clarified that the environmental authorization process is the appropriate point to consider climate change impacts. Micro-level policies like the National Integrated Resource Plan for electricity or post-approval regulatory processes such as applying for an atmospheric emissions license cannot replace the assessment of climate change during environmental authorization. The judgment was a major step forward for climate change regulation in South Africa. It reinforced that development must not override environmental protection, and it integrated climate considerations, international environmental governance, ensuring that present and future generations are safeguarded. Now, we've touched on a bit on sustainable development from an international law perspective. We move to how Section 24 is essential to climate change and sustainable development, and further touched on the Earthlife Africa case. Ultimately, sustainable development is more than laws or policies. It is a commitment to live within ecological limits, reduce our carbon footprint, and protect the environment and future generations. Every decision we make, from energy production to urban planning, agriculture to industry, has consequences for the planet. Now, if you found this video helpful, ensure to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to comment so we can engage. This is City Education, your home for knowledge in all forms, shapes, and sizes. Till we meet on the next video, goodbye.